The most dangerous prisons are the ones disguised as love. Snow fell softly across the iron gates of the Moretti estate, while black luxury cars lined the circular driveway beneath golden mansion lights glowing against the dark Chicago night. Inside the enormous ballroom, politicians, businessmen, and men feared across the city laughed beside crystal champagne towers while a string quartet played quietly near the marble staircase. Every eye in the room followed Vincent Moretti the moment he entered. The white dinner jacket, the calm, dangerous confidence, the slow smirk of a man who believed nothing in the world could ever truly leave his control. Elena Hayes stood 3 steps behind him in a fitted black silk gown that looked elegant enough for magazine covers, yet somehow made her feel invisible at the same time. Diamond earrings reflected the chandelier light while cameras flashed around them, capturing what the world believed was power, beauty, and luxury. Nobody photographed the loneliness in her eyes. Vincent wrapped one arm around her waist possessively while greeting another powerful guest beside the champagne table. "Beautiful party," the older man said with a nervous smile. Vincent glanced toward Elena briefly before answering with casual arrogance. "Everything I own is beautiful." The sentence earned quiet laughter from the men surrounding him. Elena smiled politely because that was what she had trained herself to do over the years. Smile. Stay quiet. Never embarrass Vincent in public. Somewhere between falling in love with him at 24 and standing beside him now at 32, Elena had slowly become less like a wife and more like an expensive extension of his empire. A living symbol of loyalty and ownership standing beside a powerful man who no longer noticed her emotional existence at all. Across the ballroom, soft piano music blended with expensive perfume and low conversations, while security guards remained stationed discreetly beside every entrance. Elena glanced toward the tall windows overlooking the snowy estate outside and felt the familiar suffocating pressure tighten quietly in her chest again. This mansion had everything except freedom. "You are quiet tonight," Vincent said without looking at her while sipping whiskey from a crystal glass. Elena lowered her eyes calmly. "I am tired." Vincent smirked faintly. "You should rest more. You think too much lately." The sentence sounded harmless to everyone else nearby. To Elena, it sounded like every conversation they had shared for the past 3 years. Every emotion reduced. Every concern dismissed. Every dream quietly folded away beneath his need for control. Another guest approached Vincent moments later asking about business in New York, and just like that, Elena disappeared from his attention entirely despite standing inches away from him. She watched him laugh confidently beside men terrified of disappointing him and suddenly remembered the version of Vincent she once loved years ago. Before bodyguards, before private compounds, before power became the center of his personality. There was a time he kissed her forehead softly while helping her carry paint supplies into tiny downtown apartments because she dreamed of becoming an artist. Back then, he looked at her like a person instead of something he possessed. Elena excused herself quietly from the ballroom and moved through the silent mansion corridors alone while distant music echoed faintly behind her. Upstairs, the master bedroom remained perfectly organized beneath warm golden lighting. Luxury everywhere, coldness underneath all of it. She walked slowly toward the private sitting room beside the fireplace where dozens of untouched paintings leaned against the walls beneath white sheets. Pieces of herself she stopped finishing years ago. Elena knelt beside one large canvas and carefully removed the back panel from the frame. Hidden inside rested a passport, cash, and a second phone wrapped carefully beneath old sketches. Her hands trembled slightly while touching them, not from fear anymore, from realization. The plan was becoming real. Downstairs, laughter exploded through the ballroom after another one of Vincent's stories while snow continued falling heavily beyond the mansion windows. Elena quietly slid the hidden items back into place before reattaching the panel behind the painting. Then she stood slowly in front of her unfinished artwork while staring at the woman reflected faintly through the dark window glass nearby. She barely recognized herself anymore. Moments later, Vincent's voice echoed faintly upstairs from the ballroom below. "Relax," he laughed confidently to one of his men. "She is mine no matter what." Elena closed her eyes briefly after hearing the sentence drift through the mansion beneath warm chandelier light and distant music. Then very slowly, for the first time in years, She whispered something terrifyingly honest to herself inside the silence. Not for much longer. People think luxury feels safe until they realize expensive walls can still become a prison when someone else controls every door. Morning sunlight spread softly across the enormous Moretti estate, while fresh snow melted slowly over the gardens beyond the mansion windows. Elena Hayes stood silently inside the breakfast room, wearing a cream cashmere sweater, while untouched coffee cooled beside her plate. Around her, staff moved carefully through the marble kitchen, preparing fruit trays and newspapers with the same nervous precision everyone carried inside Vincent Moretti's world. Nobody relaxed here completely, not even inside silence. Elena stared absent-mindedly toward the security monitors mounted discreetly beside the hallway entrance. Front gate cameras, garage cameras, hallway cameras, elevator cameras. Vincent called it protection. Elena had started calling it observation months ago, inside her own thoughts. Mr. Moretti left for downtown 30 minutes ago, one of the house staff informed her quietly. Elena nodded politely. Thank you. The woman disappeared immediately afterward like everyone else always did around Vincent. Quick, careful, invisible. Elena finally reached for her coffee and walked slowly toward the massive windows overlooking the frozen estate. Black SUVs waited near the circular driveway while armed security rotated shifts beside the gates below. Everything around her screamed wealth, influence, power. Yet somehow she had never felt smaller in her entire life. Her phone vibrated softly against the marble countertop. Elena looked down immediately. Unknown number. Her pulse tightened briefly before she answered quietly. Hello. You missed your studio session yesterday. The warm male voice on the other end immediately softened something inside her chest. Adrian Cole. Elena lowered her voice instinctively despite nobody standing nearby. Vincent canceled my driver. Adrian remained quiet for a moment. You do realize normal husbands do not control where their wives go every hour of the day, right? Elena gave a faint sad smile while staring through the snow-covered glass outside. Nothing about Vincent is normal. Months ago, Elena accidentally discovered Adrian's small art gallery while wandering downtown during one of her carefully scheduled shopping afternoons. Since then, painting became the only place where she still felt emotionally alive instead of managed. Adrian never asked invasive questions. He simply looked at her artwork like it mattered. Like she mattered. Your unfinished canvas is still here waiting, Adrian said gently. Elena closed her eyes briefly. I miss painting. Then come back. The simplicity of the sentence nearly broke something fragile inside her chest because nobody inside the Moretti mansion ever spoke to her like freedom remained possible anymore. Before Elena could answer, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway unexpectedly. Her entire body stiffened instantly. Vincent was home early. She ended the call quickly just as Vincent entered the breakfast room wearing a dark charcoal overcoat dusted lightly with melting snow. His presence changed the emotional temperature of every room immediately without him even trying. Calm, controlled, dangerous beneath the surface. Vincent studied her quietly while removing leather gloves. Who were you talking to? Elena forced calm into her expression. Nobody important. Vincent walked closer slowly. That usually means somebody important. Elena lowered her eyes toward the coffee cup in her hands. Vincent gently lifted her chin with 2 fingers, forcing eye contact. The gesture looked affectionate from a distance. Ownership from up close. You know I do not like secrets, he said softly. Elena nodded automatically because years beside Vincent trained her body to avoid conflict before it even started. Vincent released her face moments later before loosening his coat beside the window. Tonight there is another dinner downtown. Wear the black Valentino dress. Elena stared at him carefully. I already wore that one last month. Vincent shrugged lightly while pouring himself espresso. Then wear something similar. People expect elegance from you. Not individuality. Not emotion. Not choice. Elegance. Elena watched him answer business messages while speaking calmly into 2 different phones at once. Even now, standing inches away from her, Vincent's attention belonged more to power than to the woman beside him. Vincent, she said quietly after a long silence. He glanced up briefly. What? Elena hesitated before speaking because she already knew how the conversation would end. I was thinking maybe next month I could visit Boston for a few days. Just alone. Vincent immediately smiled faintly without warmth. No. The answer came so quickly, it almost felt rehearsed. Elena swallowed quietly. I have not seen my sister in almost a year. Vincent walked toward her slowly again. You have everything you need here. Elena stared at him while something heavy settled deeper inside her chest. That sentence again. Everything you need. As if luxury replaced freedom. As if expensive walls erased loneliness. Vincent kissed her forehead absent-mindedly before heading back toward the hallway. The driver leaves at 7 tonight. Do not be late. Moments later, he disappeared from the room entirely while staff resumed moving quietly through the mansion again. Elena remained standing alone beside the giant windows overlooking the frozen estate, while snowmelt dripped slowly from the rooftops outside. Then very carefully, she reached inside her sweater pocket and touched the second phone hidden there beneath the fabric. For the first time in years, the thought of escape no longer terrified her as much as the thought of staying forever. Before someone escapes physically, they usually spend months escaping emotionally in silence first. Heavy snow covered downtown Chicago while Elena Hayes sat quietly inside the back seat of a black luxury SUV, moving through frozen evening traffic beneath glowing city lights. Beside her, Vincent Moretti answered business calls with calm authority, while silver reflections from skyscrapers moved across the tinted windows around them. Even now, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit beside her, Vincent somehow felt emotionally farther away than strangers passing outside on snowy sidewalks. Move the meeting to Friday, he said coldly into the phone. I do not care who complains about it. Elena stared silently through the glass while his voice faded into background noise she no longer emotionally reacted to anymore. Years ago, she used to admire Vincent's confidence. Back then, his ambition felt protective, powerful, exciting. She still remembered tiny apartments in Brooklyn where they survived on cheap takeout and unfinished dreams, while Vincent built connections with dangerous men, promising wealth and influence. He used to kiss paint from her fingertips while telling her she would become one of the greatest artists in New York someday. Back then, he listened when she spoke. Back then, he looked at her like she was human instead of something fragile he needed to lock away from the world. The SUV finally stopped outside a luxury downtown restaurant, glowing warmly beneath winter lights. Security stepped forward immediately while opening Vincent's door first. Elena followed quietly beside him through flashing cameras and polished marble entrances, while wealthy guests greeted Vincent with cautious respect. Everyone feared him. Nobody truly knew him anymore. During dinner, powerful men discussed money, politics, territory, and influence while expensive wine flowed beneath soft chandelier lighting. Elena sat silently beside Vincent wearing another elegant black dress he personally selected earlier that afternoon. Every woman in the room complimented her beauty. None of them noticed how absent she felt inside herself. Elena used to paint. One older businessman suddenly mentioned after overhearing another guest discussing modern art investments. Vincent smirked faintly while cutting into his steak. Used to. The table laughed politely. Elena lowered her eyes toward the wine glass in front of her while embarrassment quietly warmed her face. Why did you stop? The businessman asked kindly. Before Elena could answer, Vincent responded casually. Because she does not need hobbies anymore. More quiet laughter followed around the table. Elena smiled mechanically because humiliation inside Vincent's world always arrived wrapped carefully in charm. But something inside her cracked quietly at that exact moment because Vincent genuinely did not understand what he had just taken from her emotionally. He no longer remembered the woman he originally fell in love with. After dinner, snowfall drifted heavily across downtown streets while Elena stood alone briefly near the restaurant entrance waiting for the driver to bring the SUV around. Cold air touched her face softly beneath glowing city lights. You look like someone trying very hard not to disappear, a calm voice said nearby. Elena turned immediately. A tall man around his early 40s stood beneath the awning holding a dark wool coat over one arm, while snow collected lightly across his shoulders. His expression remained thoughtful rather than flirtatious. Excuse me, Elena asked quietly. The way you looked inside, he explained carefully. Like your body was sitting at the table, but the rest of you left hours ago. Elena stared at him speechless because nobody had described her emotional reality that accurately in years. I should go, she whispered finally. The stranger nodded politely. Probably. Then after a brief pause he added softly, "But whoever convinced you your voice stopped matching was wrong." Before Elena could respond, Vincent appeared beside her unexpectedly. His entire posture changed immediately after noticing the stranger standing nearby. Calm, alert, possessive. Vincent slipped one arm around Elena's waist while studying the man carefully. "Problem?" he asked coldly. "None at all," the stranger answered calmly before stepping back toward the snowy sidewalk. "Good night." Vincent watched him disappear into the city crowd before looking down toward Elena. "Do you know him?" Elena shook her head quietly. "No." Vincent continued staring toward the sidewalk several seconds longer than necessary before guiding her firmly toward the waiting SUV. Inside the car, silence stretched heavily between them while snow moved softly beyond the windows. "You seemed uncomfortable tonight," Vincent finally said while loosening his cufflinks. Elena looked down at her hands resting quietly in her lap. "I did not realize becoming your wife meant disappearing completely." Vincent frowned immediately. "What is that supposed to mean?" Elena turned slowly toward the dark city outside again. "Nothing." But for the first time in years, Vincent noticed something unfamiliar in her voice that unsettled him deeply during the quiet drive home through the falling snow. Distance. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. Like a woman emotionally stepping farther away from him one silent piece at a time. The moment a woman stops arguing is usually the moment she has started emotionally leaving already. 3 days after the dinner downtown, Elena Hayes stood alone inside a small art studio hidden above an old bookstore in River North, while soft winter sunlight spilled across unfinished canvases leaning against exposed brick walls. The room smelled faintly of oil paint, coffee, and cold Chicago air drifting through a cracked window near the fire escape. For the first time in years, Elena could breathe without feeling watched every second. She wore simple jeans beneath a long cream coat instead of designer dresses selected by Vincent's assistants, and somehow the ordinary clothing made her feel more like herself than diamonds ever had. Adrian Cole adjusted a spotlight near one of her paintings while soft jazz played quietly through the studio speakers. "You paint loneliness like it physically hurts," he said thoughtfully while studying the canvas in front of him. Elena stood silently beside him holding a paintbrush between nervous fingers. The painting showed a woman trapped inside a massive golden room surrounded by dark windows reflecting nothing back at her except emptiness. Adrian glanced toward Elena carefully. "People only create work this emotionally honest when they have spent a long time pretending they are fine." Elena looked away immediately because the sentence landed too close to truth. "Maybe everyone is pretending," she answered softly. Adrian smiled faintly. "Not like this." Silence settled comfortably between them afterward. That was the strange thing about Adrian. He never pressured Elena to explain herself emotionally. He simply noticed things Vincent stopped seeing years ago. "You should show your work publicly someday," Adrian said while stepping back from the painting. Elena almost laughed quietly. Vincent would never allow that. Adrian frowned slightly. "You talk about your husband like he owns your decisions." Elena stared toward the snowy rooftops outside the studio windows while distant sirens echoed through downtown Chicago below. "Sometimes I think he owns everything except the parts of me he stopped caring about." Later that afternoon, Elena returned to the Moretti estate beneath darkening winter skies, while security gates opened automatically for the black SUV carrying her home. The mansion stood enormous and silent beneath falling snow, glowing warmly from the outside like somewhere safe. Elena knew better now. Inside the main hallway, staff hurried carefully decorating the estate for another upcoming political fundraiser Vincent planned hosting that weekend. Fresh white roses lined the marble staircase while expensive candles burned softly through the corridors. Every detail looked perfect, emotionally lifeless underneath all of it. "Mr. Moretti is waiting in the library," one of the staff informed her quietly. Elena felt immediate tension tighten through her chest. Vincent rarely waited for anyone personally. Inside the enormous library, Vincent stood near the fireplace holding a whiskey glass while city snowfall drifted beyond the tall windows behind him. His dark suit remained perfectly pressed despite the late hour, and his expression revealed nothing emotionally readable at first glance. That was part of what made Vincent so dangerous. Calmness. "Where were you?" he asked quietly. Elena removed her gloves slowly. "Shopping downtown." Vincent studied her several seconds too long. For 6 hours? Elena forced herself not to react visibly. Traffic was bad because of the snow. Vincent stepped closer gradually while the firelight reflected across his wedding ring. "You know what I hate most about lies?" he asked softly. Elena remained silent. Vincent stopped directly in front of her, then gently brushed one finger beneath a streak of blue paint near her wrist. Elena's entire body stiffened instantly. Vincent noticed. Of course he noticed. "Shopping?" he repeated calmly while staring down at the paint on his fingertip. The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. Elena lowered her eyes quietly. Vincent tilted his head slightly while studying her face with unsettling patience. "Who are you painting for?" The question carried no shouting, no anger. Somehow that made it worse. Elena forced steady breathing beneath the pressure building in the room around them. "For myself." Vincent laughed once beneath his breath, though there was no humor in it. "That is new." He moved toward the fireplace again while swirling whiskey slowly inside the glass. "You used to paint because I asked you to." Elena stared at him carefully now because for the first time she realized something frighteningly clear. Vincent genuinely believed love meant shaping another person entirely around himself. Maybe that was the problem, she whispered before thinking better of it. Vincent looked toward her sharply. Silence stretched between them while snow continued falling heavily outside the mansion windows. Then finally Vincent smiled faintly in that cold, controlled way that always made everyone around him nervous. "Be careful, Elena." His voice remained dangerously calm. People who start wanting freedom usually forget how expensive freedom becomes. Elena stood frozen beneath the library lights while the meaning beneath his words settled heavily into her chest. But strangely, instead of fear, she felt something else growing quietly stronger inside herself. Now, every single day, she stepped farther emotionally away from him. Resolve. The moment control stops working on someone is the moment fear begins replacing confidence inside the person trying to hold them too tightly. Snowstorms rolled across Chicago all week while the Moretti mansion prepared for another massive political fundraiser filled with wealthy donors, private security, and powerful men pretending morality still mattered inside rooms full of influence and money. Staff hurried endlessly through the marble hallways carrying champagne crates and floral arrangements, while classical music drifted softly through hidden speakers. Everything looked perfect on the surface. Underneath it, tension quietly spread through the mansion like hairline cracks beneath ice. Elena Hay stood inside her dressing room, staring at her reflection, while a stylist adjusted the sleeves of another expensive black gown, chosen personally by Vincent. Diamonds rested against her throat beneath soft vanity lighting. Yet all Elena could focus on was the second phone, hidden carefully inside the lining of her handbag across the room. "Mr. Moretti wants everyone downstairs in 20 minutes. The stylist informed her politely. Elena nodded absent-mindedly. The moment the woman left, Elena immediately crossed the room and unlocked the hidden phone with trembling fingers. One new message waited from Adrian. "The studio lease is ready whenever you are." Elena stared at the words while emotion tightened painfully inside her chest. A small studio apartment above the gallery. A hidden name. Cash waiting inside a storage locker downtown. Every piece of her escape slowly becoming real. Another message appeared seconds later. "You still have time to choose yourself." Elena closed her eyes briefly because nobody had spoken to her like that in years. Not as property. Not as responsibility. As a person capable of making choices. Downstairs, laughter and music echoed through the mansion while black SUVs continued arriving outside beneath heavy snowfall. Elena slipped the phone away just before Vincent entered the dressing room unexpectedly. His dark suit fit perfectly as always, every detail sharp and controlled down to the silver cufflinks glinting beneath warm lighting. Vincent studied her silently several seconds. "You look beautiful." Elena forced a faint smile. "Thank you." Vincent stepped closer slowly while adjusting a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Once, gestures like this made her heart race. Now they felt rehearsed. Possessive. "You have been distant lately," Vincent said quietly. Elena looked toward the vanity mirror instead of him. "Maybe I am tired." Vincent watched her reflection carefully. "No, this feels different." Silence settled heavily between them. Then Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and placed something small onto the vanity table. Elena's stomach dropped instantly. A paintbrush. The exact blue-handled paintbrush she accidentally left at Adrian's studio 2 days earlier. Vincent leaned lightly against the marble counter while studying her reaction with unsettling calm. "Interesting place downtown," he said softly. Elena forced herself not to visibly panic. "You followed me." Vincent gave the faintest smirk. "I protect what belongs to me." The sentence chilled the entire room despite the warm lighting around them. Elena stared down at the paintbrush while realization moved quietly through her chest. Vincent knew more than she thought. Maybe everything. "Who is Adrian Cole?" Vincent asked calmly. Elena finally looked up at him directly. "Someone who remembers I exist." For the first time all evening, Vincent's expression darkened slightly beneath the surface. Not explosive anger. Something colder. Wounded pride mixed with control slipping slowly through his fingers. "Careful," he warned quietly. "Men like Adrian disappear when they step into worlds they do not understand." Elena felt fear rise briefly before something stronger replaced it. Exhaustion. She was tired of fear controlling every decision inside her life. "Maybe I am the one disappearing," she whispered. Vincent stared at her without blinking while distant music from the ballroom floated faintly upstairs through the mansion. "You would not survive outside my protection," he said finally. Elena almost smiled sadly at the certainty in his voice. For years Vincent truly believed dependence was love. "You still do not understand me at all," she answered softly. A knock interrupted the tension moments later. "Mr. Moretti, the mayor just arrived," one of the staff announced from outside the door. Vincent continued staring at Elena several seconds longer before straightening his cuffs again with controlled composure. "Come downstairs in 5 minutes." Then he walked out without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, Elena exhaled shakily while gripping the edge of the vanity table. Her pulse hammered violently now. Vincent was suspicious. The timeline was shrinking faster than expected. Outside the mansion windows, snow fell harder beneath dark Chicago skies while guests filled the ballroom downstairs beneath crystal chandeliers and expensive laughter. Elena slowly reached for the hidden phone again while staring at herself in the mirror one final time. Then quietly, almost like confessing a secret to the frightened woman reflected back at her, she whispered the words that changed everything emotionally inside her forever. "I would rather risk losing everything than spend the rest of my life belonging to someone who never truly saw me." Sometimes the most dangerous thing a controlled woman can do is become calm. The political fundraiser ended just after midnight, while heavy snow continued falling across Chicago beneath dark storm clouds rolling over the city skyline. Guests disappeared one luxury car at a time through the iron gates of the Moretti estate, while exhausted staff quietly cleared champagne glasses and extinguished candles throughout the mansion. Upstairs inside the master bedroom, Elena Hayes sat alone near the window wearing a silk robe over bare shoulders while city lights glowed faintly beyond the snowstorm outside. Her packed escape bag remained hidden carefully beneath winter coats in the back of the closet. Passport, cash, burner phone, train ticket under another name. Every detail prepared in silence over the past month, while Vincent remained convinced fear would keep her emotionally trapped forever. The bedroom door opened slowly behind her. Vincent entered without speaking at first, loosening his tie while tension still lingered visibly beneath his controlled expression from earlier that evening. Elena remained facing the snowy windows. "You embarrass me tonight," Vincent finally said quietly. Elena looked toward his reflection in the dark glass. "Because I spoke honestly?" Vincent walked farther into the room while removing his watch. "Because you forgot your place." The sentence settled heavily into the silence around them. Years ago, Elena would have apologized automatically just to prevent emotional conflict from escalating. Tonight, she simply stared back at him through the reflection without fear. Vincent noticed immediately. "You think this Adrian situation changes something?" he asked coldly. Elena turned slowly toward him now. "No. You changed something long before Adrian existed." Vincent laughed softly beneath his breath, though there was no amusement in it. "You live in a protected estate, surrounded by security, wealth, and comfort most people cannot even imagine, and somehow you still behave like a victim." Elena stood carefully from the chair beside the window. "Because none of those things matter when someone controls your entire existence." Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "I gave you everything." Elena shook her head slowly. "No. You gave me beautiful cages. Silence followed while winter wind rattled faintly against the tall bedroom windows. Vincent studied her face, carefully now, like a man suddenly realizing a familiar language no longer translated the same way. "You are emotional tonight," he muttered. Elena almost smiled sadly at the phrase because Vincent always reduced her emotions whenever truth became inconvenient for him. Emotional, sensitive, dramatic, difficult, never lonely, never heartbroken, never invisible. Downstairs, thunder rolled softly across the city while snow continued covering the estate grounds outside. Vincent moved closer toward her until only inches separated them beneath the dim bedroom lighting. "Listen carefully," he said quietly. "Nobody leaves my world easily." Elena held his gaze for several seconds before answering with terrifying calm. "That is exactly why I need to." Something unreadable flickered briefly across Vincent's face then. Not rage. Fear. Tiny but real. The fear of finally understanding he might not fully control her anymore. His phone suddenly vibrated loudly inside the silence. Vincent glanced down impatiently at the screen before answering. Immediate tension sharpened his posture. "What happened?" he asked coldly into the phone. Elena watched quietly while Vincent listened to whoever spoke on the other end. Another problem. Another crisis. Another part of his empire demanding attention before she ever could. Vincent ended the call moments later with visible irritation darkening his expression. "I have to leave for an hour." Elena nodded softly. "Of course you do." Vincent grabbed his coat quickly before pausing near the doorway. "We are not finished with this conversation." Elena looked toward the storm outside again. "I think we finished years ago." Vincent stared at her several seconds longer before finally leaving the bedroom entirely. Moments later, she heard the distant sound of the front doors opening downstairs, followed by engines starting outside the mansion. Then silence returned. Elena remained perfectly still until the black SUVs disappeared beyond the estate gates through the snowstorm below. Only then did she move quickly. She crossed the room, locked the bedroom door, and pulled the hidden bag from the closet with shaking hands. Her breathing turned uneven now while adrenaline rushed painfully through her chest. This was no longer fantasy, no longer preparation. The storm outside had already delayed flights across Chicago and blocked major roads exactly as predicted by the weather reports all week. Tonight was the first real window she had. Elena grabbed the burner phone and dialed Adrian immediately. He answered after the first ring. "Elena." She closed her eyes briefly while gripping the phone tighter. "I am ready." Silence filled the line for one heartbeat before Adrian spoke carefully. "Are you safe?" Elena looked around the massive luxury bedroom one final time beneath soft golden lighting. The expensive furniture, the marble fireplace, the enormous bed where she spent years feeling emotionally alone beside a man who claimed ownership instead of love. Then quietly, with snow falling heavily beyond the dark mansion windows and fear mixing with freedom inside her chest for the very first time, Elena whispered the words that changed her entire life forever. "Not yet." People always imagine dramatic escapes with screaming and chaos, but the most heartbreaking disappearances usually happen in complete silence. Thunder rolled across Chicago just after 2 in the morning, while heavy snow and freezing rain buried the city beneath a violent winter storm. Inside the Moretti estate, most of the staff had finally gone to sleep after the endless fundraiser cleanup, while security rotated quietly through the mansion grounds below. Elena Hayes moved carefully through the dark master bedroom, wearing a long camel coat over black clothes, her packed bag resting against one shoulder, while her heartbeat thundered painfully inside her chest louder than the storm outside. Every movement felt unreal now, like her body was acting before her fear could stop it. She paused briefly beside the enormous bed she once believed represented safety and love years ago. Now it only reminded her how lonely someone could feel lying beside a man who wanted obedience more than emotional connection. Another flash of lightning illuminated the bedroom windows while distant thunder shook faintly through the estate walls. Elena forced herself to keep moving. Downstairs, the mansion hallways remained dim and silent beneath soft golden night lighting. Security cameras rotated methodically above the marble corridors exactly like they always did. Elena already memorized their blind spots months ago during countless sleepless nights spent planning this moment secretly in her head. She moved through the shadows quietly, gripping the burner phone tightly inside her coat pocket while cold fear and adrenaline twisted together inside her stomach. One mistake, and Vincent would stop everything before she ever reached the gates. Halfway down the back hallway, Elena froze suddenly after hearing footsteps nearby. A security guard rounded the corner carrying coffee while checking his phone distractedly. Elena slipped immediately into the dark pantry beside the kitchen entrance while her breathing turned shallow beneath the silence. The guard passed seconds later without noticing her. Elena closed her eyes briefly in relief before continuing toward the rear garage exit. Outside, freezing wind slammed against her face the moment she stepped into the storm. Snow whipped violently across the estate grounds while black SUVs sat covered beneath ice near the circular driveway. Somewhere beyond the gates, Chicago stretched endlessly beneath the storm waiting for her like a completely different life. Elena hurried across the back pathway toward the small service entrance where Adrian promised a rideshare driver would be waiting under another name. Her boots slipped slightly against frozen pavement while rain soaked the ends of her coat almost instantly. Then suddenly headlights cut through the storm behind her. Elena's entire body locked with panic. A black SUV turned slowly through the gates earlier than expected. Vincent was back. Fear crashed violently through her chest while the vehicle moved closer across the snow-covered driveway. Elena ran toward the service gate instinctively just as the SUV stopped near the mansion entrance. Vincent stepped out beneath the storm wearing a dark overcoat while bodyguards hurried around him through freezing rain. Even from across the distance, his presence still carried terrifying control. "Elena!" he shouted suddenly after spotting movement near the pathway. Elena stopped breathing. Vincent moved forward several steps into the storm while security turned immediately toward her direction. "Elena, stop!" His voice echoed through the snow and darkness beneath flashing headlights. For one horrifying second, Elena almost turned back automatically because years of fear trained her body to obey him before thinking. Then another memory hit her all at once. The cameras, the locked schedules, the dismissed emotions, the sentence downstairs in the ballroom weeks ago. She is mine. Something inside Elena finally broke free completely. She turned and ran harder through the storm toward the service gate, while security shouted behind her. Freezing wind burned her lungs painfully as she pushed through the narrow opening and onto the dark side street beyond the estate walls. A silver rideshare sedan waited there exactly as promised with headlights glowing softly through the snowstorm. The driver unlocked the door immediately. Elena climbed inside, shaking violently while the car pulled away from the Moretti estate without hesitation. Through the frozen rear window, she saw Vincent standing near the gates beneath heavy snowfall, completely motionless now as the realization finally reached him. She was actually leaving. Minutes later, back inside the silent mansion, Vincent stormed through the master bedroom, searching furiously for answers while security scrambled throughout the estate. Then he saw it, resting alone beside Elena's unfinished painting near the fireplace. Her wedding ring. Beneath it sat a folded handwritten note trembling slightly from the wind drifting through the cracked balcony doors. Vincent picked it up slowly with frozen fingers while stormlight flashed across the dark room around him. Only one sentence appeared on the page beneath Elena's elegant handwriting. "You never loved me," without ownership attached to it. For the first time in years, Vincent Moretti stood completely powerless inside his own mansion while winter thunder shook the city outside and the woman he believed belonged to him disappeared forever into the storm. The cruelest realization for a powerful man is discovering money can delay loss, but never reverse it once someone emotionally stops loving the cage you built around them. 3 weeks after Elena vanished into the Chicago snowstorm, Vincent Moretti stood alone inside his penthouse office overlooking the frozen city skyline, while untouched whiskey sat melting beside stacks of private investigation reports spread across the enormous glass desk. Every contact he possessed had been activated. Airports monitored, bank activity traced, hotels searched, security footage reviewed across multiple cities. Yet Elena seemed to disappear like smoke the moment she crossed beyond the estate gates that night. Vincent stared silently at another printed photograph investigators placed on his desk earlier that morning. Grainy subway camera footage showing a woman resembling Elena wearing a wool coat and knit hat entering Union Station beside a crowd of strangers hours after the storm. her face partially hidden. Alone. The image unsettled him more than he expected, because for the first time, he realized Elena planned this carefully long before he noticed anything was wrong. "We still have people checking Boston and New York," one of his men explained cautiously near the office doorway. Vincent barely looked up. "Expand the search." "We already did." Vincent's jaw tightened immediately beneath the cold blue office lighting. Nobody inside his world ever responded with limitations. "Then keep going until you find her." The man nodded quickly before leaving the office without another word. Silence returned instantly afterward. Vincent leaned back slowly inside the leather chair while snow drifted outside the skyscraper windows beyond him. The office felt unbearably empty lately. So did the mansion. Elena's absence somehow haunted every room now that she was no longer physically there for him to ignore. Weeks earlier, he barely noticed whether she spoke during dinner. Now silence followed him everywhere like punishment. Downstairs, another business meeting waited. Another negotiation. Another empire demanding attention. Vincent canceled all of it. None of it mattered anymore, because for the first time in years something existed outside his control entirely. Elena. Later that evening, Vincent returned to the estate after midnight, while freezing rain coated the long driveway beneath dark winter skies. Inside the mansion, staff moved carefully around him with nervous expressions because everyone could feel the emotional shift spreading through the house now. Vincent no longer carried calm confidence. He carried obsession. He walked directly upstairs toward the private sitting room where Elena once painted quietly during lonely evenings inside the mansion. Most of her unfinished artwork still remained exactly where she left it weeks ago beneath soft golden lighting. Vincent stood silently before one canvas, showing a woman trapped inside a massive gold room surrounded by locked windows. He remembered mocking the painting months earlier because he thought it looked depressing. Now he finally understood what she had been trying to tell him all along. The mansion was never luxury to Elena. It was captivity dressed beautifully. Vincent lowered himself slowly into the chair beside the fireplace, while memories hit him harder than expected inside the silence. Elena falling asleep waiting for him during late nights years ago. Elena asking him to attend gallery openings he always skipped. Elena trying to speak during dinners while he answered business calls over her voice. The signs existed everywhere. He simply never believed she possessed the courage to leave him completely. His phone vibrated suddenly. Adrian Cole's gallery address appeared in a message forwarded from another investigator. Vincent stood instantly. 1 hour later, black SUVs stopped outside the small downtown gallery beneath falling rain and glowing winter streetlights. Vincent entered alone while soft jazz played quietly through the nearly empty space, filled with paintings and warm amber lighting. Adrian stood behind the counter calmly, unsurprised to see him. "Where is she?" Vincent asked immediately. Adrian studied him several seconds before answering. "Gone." Vincent stepped closer slowly. "You helped her disappear." Adrian remained perfectly calm. "No. She saved herself." The sentence hit Vincent harder than anger would have. "You think you know her?" Vincent asked coldly. Adrian shook his head faintly. "I think I noticed her." Silence stretched tightly between them beneath the soft gallery lighting. Vincent looked around at the paintings covering the walls while something painful settled deeper inside his chest. Elena belonged in places like this all along. Not trapped inside guarded mansions pretending silence was happiness. Adrian finally spoke again, quieter this time. "Do you know the saddest part?" Vincent said nothing. Adrian glanced toward one unfinished painting resting near the back wall. "She still loved you when she left." Vincent looked away immediately because somehow those words hurt more than betrayal ever could. Outside the gallery windows, freezing rain reflected across downtown Chicago while strangers hurried beneath umbrellas through the winter night. Vincent stood motionless inside the warm light of the gallery, realizing something devastating at last. Elena did not disappear because she stopped loving him. She disappeared because loving him slowly destroyed who she was becoming beside him. Sometimes the final proof of love is letting someone become free enough to never return. Early spring sunlight spilled softly across Manhattan sidewalks while people hurried through Soho beneath blooming trees and warm afternoon air, replacing the brutal winter storms that once covered Chicago months earlier. Inside a small independent art gallery tucked between cafes and bookstores, Elena Hayes stood quietly beneath soft golden lighting while guests wandered slowly around her newest collection of paintings hanging along exposed white brick walls. Only now, nobody inside the gallery knew her as Elena Moretti anymore. The name printed beside her artwork simply read Eleanor Hart. Her new life fits softly around her now, like peace instead of performance. She wore a cream linen blouse with simple gold earrings while speaking calmly with visitors about color, emotion, and memory. No security guards watched nearby. No cameras followed her movements. No one controlled where she stood, who she spoke to, or how long she stayed somewhere. For the first time in years, Elena finally existed without asking permission first. Across the gallery, Adrian adjusted fresh flowers beside the entrance while soft jazz drifted quietly through hidden speakers. Their relationship remained gentle and undefined even after all these months. Adrian never pressured her emotionally. He simply created space where she could breathe again. Sometimes healing mattered more than romance. Elena smiled faintly while helping an older woman purchase one of her paintings showing sunlight pouring through an open window into an empty room. "It feels peaceful," the woman said warmly. Elena looked toward the canvas thoughtfully. "It is about finally leaving somewhere that stopped feeling like home." Late afternoon sunlight shifted slowly across the gallery floor, while conversation and quiet laughter filled the space around her. Then suddenly Elena froze. Outside the front window, a familiar black SUV sat parked across the street beneath the spring trees. Her heartbeat slowed strangely instead of panicking. Deep down, maybe she always knew this moment would eventually come. The gallery door opened softly seconds later. Vincent Moretti stepped inside alone wearing a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit, while city sunlight reflected faintly across the glass behind him. Conversations inside the gallery quieted instinctively beneath the weight of his presence even now. But something about Vincent looked different. Smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Exhaustion shadowed his expression beneath months of sleepless regret. Elena and Vincent stared at each other across the gallery, without speaking, while soft jazz continued quietly around them. Months ago, she would have feared this moment. Now she simply felt sad for both of them. Adrian noticed Vincent immediately from near the entrance, but remained respectfully distant after Elena gave the slightest reassuring nod. Vincent walked slowly toward her, while guests quietly drifted away, pretending not to notice the tension filling the room. Finally, he stopped only a few feet away beneath the warm gallery lights. "You look happy," he said quietly. Elena studied him carefully. For the first time in years, Vincent was looking at her instead of controlling her. "Really looking. I feel peaceful," she answered softly. Vincent lowered his eyes briefly while emotion moved visibly beneath his controlled expression. "I searched everywhere." Elena nodded gently. "I know." Silence settled between them while spring sunlight glowed across the paintings surrounding them. Vincent glanced around the gallery slowly before speaking again. "This is who you were supposed to become all along, is it not?" Elena looked toward her artwork lining the walls. "I think this is who I was before I forgot myself beside you." The honesty hurt visibly across Vincent's face. Months ago, he would have argued immediately, controlled the conversation. Tonight, he simply listened. "I loved you," he admitted quietly. Elena's eyes softened sadly. "I know you did." Vincent looked at her carefully then. But it was never enough. Elena shook her head slowly. "Love without freedom eventually feels like fear." The words settled heavily into the silence around them. Outside, warm spring wind moved through the city streets while people passed beneath blooming trees, completely unaware of the quiet heartbreak unfolding inside the gallery. Vincent stared at Elena for a long moment before finally asking the question that haunted him since the night she vanished into the storm. "Did you ever stop loving me?" Elena looked at him beneath the soft golden light while emotions flickered quietly through her expression. "No," she answered honestly. "I just finally started loving myself too." Vincent closed his eyes briefly because somehow that truth hurt more than hatred ever could. When he looked back at her again, something inside him finally released. Not ownership, not obsession, acceptance. He gave the faintest nod before stepping backward slowly toward the gallery entrance. Elena watched him quietly while sunlight reflected across the glass doors behind him. Vincent paused one final time before leaving. "You were never mine," he said softly, almost to himself. Then he walked out into the warm Manhattan afternoon alone while the gallery door closed gently behind him. Elena remained standing beneath the peaceful light, surrounded by her paintings, her freedom, and the quiet life she rebuilt from the ruins of loving someone who confused possession with devotion. And for the first time in years, the silence around her no longer felt lonely.